Shares of Asian steelmakers fall after Trump announces new import tariffs on metals. Meanwhile, Beijing hits back with counter tariffs that target key American exports, including energy. And we head to Paris, where world leaders and tech giants gather for the AI Action Summit. Hello, I'm Taiba Aiden with the latest business and finance news here on TRT World. Shares of steelmakers in Asia mostly fell on Monday after US President Donald Trump announced new blanket of tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Trump said on Sunday that he was planning to introduce new 25% tariffs on the metals on top of existing duties, in another major escalation of his trade policy overhaul. The largest source of US steel imports are Canada, Brazil and Mexico, followed by South Korea and Vietnam. Trump also said that while the US government would allow Japan's Nippon Steel to invest in US steel, it would not allow it to become a majority stakeholder. He also said he will announce reciprocal tariffs this week to take effect almost immediately, applying them to all countries and matching the tariff rates levied by each country. The dollar rose on the bag and US Treasury yields ticked higher. For more on this, we're joined by Tim Waterer in Sydney. He's Chief Market Analyst at KCM Trade. Tim, we're seeing steelmakers in Asia already sliding. Who could these latest tariffs hurt the most?
Good to be with you. Yeah, well, as you mentioned there, I guess on a country level, we're looking at the same names we've seen over the past few weeks. So Canada topping the list as the biggest exporter to the US, both for steel and aluminium. But we're not sure how the existing pause on tariffs will fit into these latest measures. I guess we'll have to wait and see in the next few days. So Mexico up there too. Across Asia, we're looking at South Korea and also China. They're in the top 6 exporters to the US for those products as well. So on a company level, that's where it gets a little bit more difficult to predict. I mean, I guess the companies that have got existing infrastructure in the US in the form of plants, infrastructure, job creation, they'll be in a better position, I think, to weather any sort of tariff storm compared to those which are solely based outside of the US markets. They're the companies that will be left scrambling, looking for other markets if there are decreased demand from the US stemming from these 25% tariffs that have been mooted.
And what about US industries? How could they be affected by higher prices?
Yeah, so I guess what Trump is trying to do is regenerate US domestic production. So US steelmakers are sort of, I guess, standing in line to perhaps benefit most from these latest measures. And that's where it also gets interesting with regards to, as you talked about, Nippon Steel wanting to invest in US steel. There's been political opposition to that. And we know that Trump did meet with the Japanese PM last week. Maybe there'll be an investment there rather than outright ownership. So there are a few things to play out there, but I think, yeah, as I said, any steel companies who have got operations in the US or domestic producers themselves, they could be the ones to, I guess, come in and, I guess, fill the void when it comes to supplying what has been left out by these tariff repercussions.
Right, and in his first term, Donald Trump granted several trading partners exemptions. Can we expect something similar this time round?
A number of world leaders will be certainly hoping so. I think it'll come down to what the current trade balance situation is. So if we take traditional US allies, Japan and Australia, for example, we know that Japanese leader met with Trump on Friday. Australian PM wants to have a phone call with Trump this week. So if we take that situation there, Australia has a trade deficit to the US. So perhaps Australia would have a better bargaining chip to play for getting an exemption. Japan could be a little bit more difficult because they run trade surplus with the US, which Trump has highlighted at the press conference with the Japanese Prime Minister. So I think it would come down to a case-by-case basis, but we do know Trump is open to negotiations. So I think it would come down to which of those allies will come to the table with the best bargaining chips.
All right, Tim Waterer, Chief Market Analyst at KCM Trade. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now a quick look at some of the other top business stories from around the world. China's consumer inflation came in at 0.5% in January, the fastest in 5 months, due to increased spending during the Lunar New Year holiday. But producer prices continue to decline, falling by 2.3% for the 28th consecutive month. Experts warn that deflationary pressures may continue throughout the year unless domestic demand picks up, while US tariffs will further increase the pressure on the Chinese economy. Donald Trump has announced plans to target billions in cuts to the Pentagon budget as part of an effort led by Elon Musk to reduce US government spending. In an interview on Sunday, Trump praised Musk's work with the Department of Government Efficiency, despite facing legal challenges and criticism from Democrats. Trump revealed that the Department of Defense, with an $800 billion annual budget, would be the next area to focus on for cost reductions. Shares in Dongfeng Motor jumped as much as 85% after the Chinese carmaker said it's planning a restructuring with another state-owned company. The move has sparked speculation of consolidation in the nation's ultra-competitive car market. Just like their counterparts in Europe and the US, China's legacy car makers are also struggling to regain ground lost to the electric vehicle boom. Washington's tariffs on Chinese goods have triggered a response from Beijing. Starting on Monday, China's counter-tariffs that target key American exports, including energy, automobiles and machinery, come into effect. Here's how China's countermeasures will affect American interests. China is imposing a 15% tariff on American coal and liquefied natural gas, making it more expensive for Chinese buyers. US crude oil will also be taxed at 10%, putting pressure on energy companies that rely on exports to China. American-made cars and pickup trucks will now be hit with a 10% tariff, making them less competitive in the Chinese market. Agricultural machinery, another key US export, is also being taxed, adding further strain on US manufacturers. Additionally, Beijing has opened an anti-monopoly investigation into Google, increasing pressure on US tech firms. While Google is blocked inside China, its software and services remain crucial for many Chinese manufacturers, making the probe a potential disruption to business. While the US has imposed tariffs on over $400 billion worth of Chinese goods, China's countermeasures only hit around $20 billion in US exports, just 12% of what the US sends to China each year. Beijing has also avoided targeting high-tech industries, pharmaceuticals or aerospace equipment, signaling a controlled response rather than a full-scale trade war. For more, we're joined by Victor Teo, an Indo-Pacific Affairs analyst in Singapore. Victor, firstly, how will China's energy tariffs impact US producers?
I think I would consider this a shadow boxing because, in truth, most of the Chinese market, the energy that is being imported is actually from Russia. So Russia is actually the key, if like, importer for Chinese energy, and I think the ban of the tariffs on the US energy, if you like, trading would have very minimal impact. And like what you say, the Chinese response is actually very measured, very restrained, and I would consider them to be shadow boxing. You know, it's just a lot of talk, a lot of gestures, but with very little significant impact, I think.
Right, and what about US manufacturing? What impact will China's tariffs have on that sector? Well,
for instance, the automobile market, the Chinese are not actually buying an awful lot of cars from the United States. Most of the cars that are being sold in China are either domestic production, for instance, BYD and all the other EVs, or they are actually Chinese joint ventures with German automakers like Volkswagen or BMW or Audi. So I don't see how this might actually have a big impact on it would just weaken the American exporters, if any. In terms of the steel and aluminium, again, most of the Chinese steel exports do not actually go to the United States. In fact, since the Trump first administration, that sector has actually been reduced, and even if Biden increased the tariffs as well, it has had actually minimal impact on the Chinese exports or steel exports, because China now exports mainly to, say, Japan, the Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. They don't export so much steel and aluminium to the US. So, for Donald Trump to say that I'm going to put like 10% or 25% or whatever, it doesn't quite impact the Chinese all that much.
And how about China's anti-monopoly probe? How would this impact big tech?
To be honest, Google is not officially allowed in China. So China has their own considerations. So there's what we call the Great Firewall of China. Google doesn't have a free reign in China. So, again, like I said, I think this again has a minimal impact on China. But China has been developing their own search engine, Baidu, and as you know, China is now, ever since Donald Trump started to ban the Android software from being operated by the Chinese phone operators, the Chinese have actually gone on to develop their own Android equivalent for mobile phones. So they have the Harmony they have their own set of Android-like software for the phones. So this is the software that Huawei has been using. So in that respect, it might only help to consolidate the development of the Chinese software for mobile phones further.
All right, Victor, Theo, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Now, despite his predecessor hosting last year's summit, it's believed UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer will not be travelling to Paris. That said, the government is committed to stay ahead in the AI race. But can it compete with tech giants from the US and China? Tulay Kalyon Hasnedaroglu speaks to futurist Andrew Eborn in London.
Artificial intelligence is transforming lives, industries and economies worldwide. Nations are investing billions of dollars to lead. And recently the UK has announced its plans to dominate the AI race. But can it really become an AI superpower? To discuss it further, I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, who's a lawyer, broadcaster and a futurist.
A futurist, back to the futurist. It's got to be good. And I'll tell you what, Britain has always been leading the world in innovation, from the light bulb to the television to the telephone to penicillin and even to the World Wide Web.
So they say the US invents, China imitates and the EU regulates. Where does the UK stand?
Well, the UK is one of the greatest inventors in the world. And actually, things like DeepMind, it's a UK company. It was founded in the UK in 2010. It was sold in 2014 to Google for 400 million, small change, but it worked on that sort of basis. So we are absolutely front and centre. The other great thing is, as well, is that we had the first ever AI safety summit right here in the UK. And that's where the UK can do not just about the innovation, but also about the sensible regulation. Make sure we get the safety net in place accordingly.
Yeah, and what does the UK need to do to stay the top of the game?
Well, I think staying top of the game, there's a number of things, and there were three things I would say. Is one, you need the infrastructure, and when they're talking about turbo boosting AI in Britain, that's what you need, the infrastructure, invest in these sort of data centres and so on and so forth. You need the talent, you need to make sure we attract the greatest minds and keep the greatest minds, because throughout history, the greatest minds have been here in Britain. But we need to understand the opportunities, but also the threats involved.
Exactly, that's my next question. So what are the risks if the UK falls behind?
Well, first, it's not going to fail. It mustn't fail, and I'll make sure it doesn't. But the other thing is this, is that what will happen is AI is going to dominate everybody's life. It has been the buzzword forever. It's actually started in the 1950s. It's not a new thing. And AI, artificial intelligence, will have an impact on every single aspect of our life. And as I say, if you look at medicine, the seismic changes, diseases, cures for diseases we never thought possible are looking at that sort of basis. It was announced a few days ago, for example, about 700,000 improvement for breast cancer screening, and so on and so forth. As a result of it, what AI does, it facilitates speeding up those sort of processes, analysing data in a way that the human mind doesn't. Because people will turn around and say the way that you educate these machines is by scraping the internet for other people's work. So we need to have a fair and equitable way of making sure that people are treated for the results of their work as well.
World leaders and CEOs are descending on Paris this week for an international summit on artificial intelligence. They will be strategizing how to harness its transformative power and even making pledges on how to contain the development of this rapidly advancing technology. There will also be plenty of investment. For example, Canadian fund Brookfield plans to invest $21 billion to help build a data center in France by 2030. This massive commitment highlights France's growing efforts to increase its significance in the AI race. The Grand Palais in Paris will host top political figures, including US Vice President JD Vance and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as well as tech giants like OpenAI's Sam Altman. That said, like previous summits, this summit won't produce any binding regulation. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates is ready to pour in up to $51 billion. Its goal is to build Europe's largest data campus for education purposes in France. Details on the final location and its potential impact are yet to be announced. And tech giants Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft and Meta are ramping up their spending. They're funneling massive capital into data center expansions and cutting-edge AI tools. Competition is fierce and big tech is wary of newcomers, particularly after the shock China's DeepSeek brought to the tech industry and its market value. Artificial intelligence is also coming to the assistance of farmers in India. It's offering ways to improve crops and efficiency. But how far can this technology go? Nicholas Morgan has the details.
Half of India's population depends on farming, yet many still use traditional methods. Some, though, are starting to use AI technology to help their crops thrive. For example, pomegranate farmer Rishina Kuruvilla checks an app linked to sensors tracking soil moisture, pests and weather. She says the technology has slashed her costs by 20%.
So we monitor the humidity, temperature and the sound. And for example, if the temperature increases, it basically means there's a potential threat in the hive, because what the bees do is they'll create heat within the hive to ward out the intruder. So if there's a spider or like a wasp or something, so we know there's something wrong.
The AI boom has led to over 450 agri-tech startups in India. They offer farmers data-driven solutions to reduce costs and improve efficiency. But there's a catch. Much of this tech is priced well beyond their means.
Now, these people, their annual income, net income, is 80,000 rupees. Now, with 80,000, will they take up something which is even 5,000 rupees worth? What will they eat in the house? Since they own a farm, they take the farm produce home and eat out of it. They are surviving.
India's government is investing heavily in AI farming, but digital illiteracy and poverty keep many from accessing it. Meaning, for now at least, AI's promise of sustainability remains out of reach for those who need it most. Nicholas Morgan, TRT World.
For more on the global AI race, we're joined now by Toby Walsh, Chief Scientist at the UNSW's AI Institute. Toby, the US and China have been investing heavily into AI. How do you see Europe's position in this race?
Well, Macron would like the AI Action Summit to be more about Europe, and indeed, he's just announced this morning $100 billion. I mean, that's quite a lot of money being invested by the private sector in Europe, in France, in AI. But somehow I think the news is still always going to be about the race between China and the US, and that's witnessed by seeing this US is sending Vice President JD Vance. His first overseas trip is to the AI Summit. and China are sending the vice premier this time to the AI summit. So they really are showing the importance it is to their economies to be winning the AI race.
And what's driving these hefty investments into data centers?
Well, to deliver all of this AI takes a huge amount of resources. And search on one of these models like ChatGPT is 10 times as expensive as a Google search. We're seeing the amount of energy be consumed by data centers go through the roof. It used to be 1% of global energy. It's now about 2% and due to double again. So that's going to require vast amounts of money, vast amounts of investments in data centers to deliver it. And we're seeing it, $1 billion being spent around the world every day, a lot of it on building the infrastructure that's going to deliver this AI to you.
And given these large investments, do you think governments should intervene more to regulate AI spending?
Well, certainly it's going to need regulation. This is a very powerful technology, as we're hearing about in the top of this report, that's going to impact on so many different parts of our lives, in medicine, in education, in pretty much any industry you can think of. And these tech companies are wielding significant amounts of power. And we've always had to regulate large industries, and the tech sector is no different. So yes, increasingly there is going to be regulation of the tech sector. And again, that's the one place actually that Europe is really leading the way. The EU AI Act that came into force at the beginning of this year is the first substantive piece of AI regulation around the world. That's going to set a very important precedent. But have to say, the AI Action Summit, as the word action in the summit suggests, has been much less about regulation and more about how do we invest and who's going to be winning the race.
And following China's DeepSeek, where do you expect the next big AI breakthrough to emerge?
Well, the great thing about the Chinese DeepSeek advancement is that it demonstrates that it doesn't take the person with the deepest pockets. Even China can win at this. Anyone can win at this. There's now significant plans in Europe, in many other countries, to build similar models. It's really anyone's race to win still.
All right, Toby Walsh, Chief Scientist at the UNSW's AI Institute. Thank you very much for joining us.